Hey, this is Nick with BikeTalk, and I'm here with three very important people in the Myfig project. Myfig is the bike lane that's going to go from around USC through downtown. It's going to be LA's first protected cycle track. Do you guys want to go around and introduce yourselves?
Sure. This is Eric Bruins, and I'm the Planning and Policy Director for the LA County Bicycle Coalition.
And this is Tim Framo. I'm the Project Manager for the Myfig project, Traffic Engineer with the City of Los Angeles Department of Transportation.
And this is Deborah Murphy. I'm a consultant to the City of Los Angeles. I wrote the grant 6 years ago, and I'm also working on grant administration, and I'm the Executive Director of Los Angeles Walks.
Okay, so Eric, you want to take it away here?
Sure. So we're here to talk about Myfig, which is the city's first protected bikeway, also known as a cycle track. It'll connect a number of really important destinations along the Figueroa corridor, including, the Coliseum, USC, LA Live. We have a few major institutions also, including there's a bunch of car dealerships, there's the AAA headquarters, there's some churches, and it really is a key north-south commuter route in and out of downtown for the folks that do live in South Los Angeles. And so, speaking for LACBC, we're really excited to see the City of Los Angeles venture into a new world of higher quality bicycle facilities, those that will appeal to folks that are 8 years old and 80 years old, and all ages and shapes and sizes and colors in between. And so this is a really important step for the city because we've been doing such a great job of getting miles of bike lanes down, but those miles hasn't necessarily translated into the full range of ridership that we would like to see without these higher quality facilities. So we have Tim and Deborah. And so Deborah, because you wrote the grant, do you want to kind of give an overview about the objectives for this project? Sure,
I'd like to do that. So the grant is funded through the state of California through Proposition 1C, which is called the Infill Infrastructure Grant. The grants were funded through a bond measure that was on the 2006 ballot to have infrastructure projects that support new affordable housing being developed around the state. And in 2008, when the grant was being written, we had a serious decline in our economy, and one of the few neighborhoods that was seeing development activity and met a lot of the other goals of the grant project is downtown in South Los Angeles. So to qualify for the funding, you had to have a lot of new housing, including at least 15% affordable housing. The infrastructure to be built with the grant funding was to support that new housing and get people to their jobs, to get people to recreational resources, to be in a community that already had substantial transit investment, accessibility, and that new improvements would help people to move through those communities on foot, on bikes, and on public transportation to help reduce traffic congestion and improve air quality, along with meeting a lot of other important statewide sustainability goals. So we qualified for $30 million in grant funding based on the fact that over 1,000 units of new housing was going to be built even at this tough economic time. So the project has moved forward to date because it met a lot of those goals. And a lot of the things that were outlined in the project were to help create stronger neighborhood identity, to connect people, as I said, between their jobs and the existing transit system, as well as to other destinations that Eric mentioned, Expo Park, LA Live, Staples Center, all the jobs that are in downtown, and particularly the name of the project was called Linking South Los Angeles to Downtown Figueroa Corridor. We wanted to improve pedestrian walkability as well as pedestrian safety. I mentioned environmental sustainability and bike-friendly street design were all key elements of the scope of work that was written for the landscape architects who were hired on the project, Troller Mayer Associates and Melendres. We wanted to make sure that we were doing activities as I mentioned, that make it better to walk, bike, and take public transportation. And through the community process that we had developed over the last 4 years, led to lots of input from community members and establishments along the corridor that led us to the current design that has a key component of the cycle tracks that then incorporate bus platforms for transit patrons and new street lighting and improved sidewalk conditions for pedestrians along with new street trees and improved intersection designs to add to pedestrian safety. So the current design really helps manifest a lot of those goals and implementation strategies that were established at the beginning of the project.
So how how much community process was there? How many meetings did you have? What level of surveys did you have? Kind of where did all the ideas come from?
Right. Well, we had 2 workshops back in 2011, one in the northern section north of the 10 freeway to get input from people in the downtown area, and another workshop south of the 10 freeway down at Expo Park, where we at each of those meetings had like over 80 or so or more people out at those input meetings where we had kind of workshop type of setting where people could give design input and what their mobility needs were, how they got around their communities today, and how they wanted to be able to move in the future. And we also had surveys that were handed out and turned back in. We had another round of workshops in 2013 to present some of the design ideas and alternatives and to see people's input on those things. Had survey forms that people and comment cards that people filled out, as well as developed a website that people could get input, as well as a Facebook page. And so we had a variety of multimedia kind of outreach in person and online, as well. A number of small meetings that were held with different groups, whether they be USC or Expo Park stakeholders or developers and property owners around Staples and LA Live, business owners in the Figueroa corridor or in South Park. So there were lots of meetings with different stakeholder groups, as well community-wide meetings.
And you also had your own Twitter handle, right? I'm not sure how many streets have a Twitter handle.
Yeah, really. Yes, absolutely.
So it seems like all of the stakeholders were really engaged, including the business owners and the folks representing those large institutions along the corridor.
Right. The 2 business improvement districts, the Figueroa Corridor BID and the South Park Stakeholders Business Improvement District, have been involved since before writing the grant. They were helpful in inspiring the city, Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency, to apply for the grant.
You mentioned a number of great features, including enhanced sidewalks, street trees, street lighting, transit platforms, and the cycle tracks, of course, which is the part that LACBC is most excited about. Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are associated with building those features into a street?
Sure. Well, very similarly to the challenges we have with striped bike lanes, we're at a point now where our streets are essentially built out, and there are limited, if any, opportunities really to widen streets. Very few opportunities, and so I think, and also in sort of in line with what the project goals are, is to repurpose the existing right-of-way, and that's what we're trying to do here. So with that comes the challenge of essentially having to sacrifice something, in this case in the form of a vehicular lane or multiple vehicular lanes, and repurpose that for a different use. In this case, pedestrian and space for a protected bicycle lane. And so there's been some controversy with specific stakeholders who are concerned about access and concerned about traffic flow and how they might be impacted by that aspect of the project. But what we've seen looking at similar projects in other cities is that these types of projects end up providing great benefit for the local businesses and especially the local businesses and residents, in that they turn the street from being a commuter route to more of a local destination. And I think that's the idea. The idea is it's twofold. One is to enhance the commuter route for different modes. Specifically, we have these affordable housing units where you have folks that may be transit dependent or may ride a bike for the purposes of commuting, and they may not have a choice. So one goal is to provide them with a level of infrastructure that we've been providing for vehicles for a long time. The other is really to transform the area and to make the street a street where people can gather and enjoy the space. They can walk, and have pleasant experiences without experiencing, cars racing by them. And so that's why there's a suite of amenities being proposed. It's not just the bike facility. It's a number of other treatments to help really redefine the corridor as a public space.
Our real goal is to make this an economic development and placemaking opportunity. That building infrastructure is our way of investing in our public realm, our streets, to help create new place and economic development opportunities for private property owners to reap the benefits of that public investment. So it's a really public-private partnership.
And what we've seen from data from other cities like New York and San Francisco is that typically does happen with these types of projects, that the economic vitality of the area increases because you are encouraging people to linger. You're actually improving the visibility of businesses because you don't have cars going at the speeds that they're not going today. And so I think that's what we're trying to do is show that there's evidence that it's not likely to negatively impact the businesses in the sense that they think it's going to impact them in terms of access and for patrons to reach those businesses.
And what do you think the experience is going to be like riding down that corridor after this project is done? And maybe you want to say what's different between the cycle track versus a normal bike lane.
Well, really, it's geared towards, as you mentioned, the 8 to 80-year-old crowd, so a wider range of abilities in terms of cycling. It's not going to be built for someone who wants to race down there at breakneck speed on a bike. So it's really going to be, it's more geared towards the safety and comfort and protecting all movements. So you're going to have, as a cyclist, you're going to have very few conflicts that you normally have in an existing bike lane or a traditional bike lane, I should say, or lack thereof. You're going to have very little turning movements across the bike lane. You're going to have driveways, but you're not going to have, for example, at a signalized intersection, you're not going to have right-turning vehicles moving at the same time that you're moving through. So, and you're not going to have buses pulling to the curb that they do in situations today on a traditional bike lane. So, it's going to be a much more pleasant and comfortable experience versus any other infrastructure that's not as robust in that sense.
And so you actually send the bikes around the backside of the bus stops, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, what I like to say, what I'm going to see is lots of smiles on people's faces. And being able to enjoy seeing that smile. And right.
So city streets can actually make people happy, huh?
That's right, exactly. And when they're happy, they want to part with their money.
So have any similar facilities gone in along streets in other cities with the same mix of kind of large institutions and auto dealers and those types of uses?
I can't say for sure if they've gone in that similarly of a makeup in terms of the frontage. I mean, what we've seen is in other urban dense areas like New York, like in Chicago and San Francisco, they have implemented these facilities on streets that have significant volumes of traffic. Whether they have auto dealers or not to the degree that Figueroa does, probably not. But there's enough similarities, I think, to where the benefits are likely to be seen. It is something new for us, and it is a challenge, and we're not shying away from that. But I think we're at the point now, and especially in line with what the mayor's goals of complete streets and great streets is looking at these big streets that are have been seen traditionally as commuter routes essentially, and bringing life back into them and seeing them in a different way. So I think Figueroa meets that criteria very well.
Well, I know that a lot of people do associate it with those large uses, but there are a lot of small businesses along the Figueroa corridor that people don't really see or notice because they're tucked away either in strip malls or they just, you're going by them too quickly. I know because I attended USC, we didn't really ever go to Figueroa because it wasn't a nice place to be, and we didn't really ever find out what was there.
Yeah, and I think some of that is transforming with a lot of the new housing that's coming into downtown. There's a definite demand for people to be able to shop locally and walk to conduct their business and do their daily errands. So I think we're going to see more things transforming from those kind of more auto-oriented uses to more pedestrian and bike-friendly businesses along the corridor with this project, or even, would hate to say without the project, because there's going to be much more demand for those uses.
And frankly, a lot of those small businesses have, from at least what I've heard at those community meetings, they've been generally very favorably, seeing the project very favorably, because I think they do realize that they could be directly receiving some of the benefits from what the project could do. So,
do you feel like they're being heard in this process right now, as we have the larger institutions kind of raising their voices about this project?
Not to the extent that they should be. I think they were at the public meetings and they have submitted comments, but I think that's been overshadowed in the recent public hearings and whatnot. So I think I think that folks need to be reminded, especially the decision makers need to be reminded of those voices.
Do you want to talk a little bit about where this project is in the process right now?
Sure. We're at the point now where we're basically wrapping up the construction documents. So we're finishing up the design portion of the project. We've broken the project up into 3 components. So we have the centerpiece, which is Figueroa itself, from MLK all the way up to 7th. We have 2 sort of connecting arms to that spine. So we have improvements on MLK from Vermont to Figueroa, which don't involve any changes to the configuration, although my department we are also working on bike lanes on King as a separate project. And then there are improvements on 11th Street near LA Live from Figueroa to Broadway. And those improvements are really pedestrian focused, although we are adding a bike lane there. We are taking it from 2 lanes to 1. It's a one-way street. The real capital investment is to widen the sidewalks and provide a lot of amenities for the pedestrian realm on 11th Street. That's a really important connection between sort of the edge of the fashion district and then the entertainment district, LA Live. So all 3 components we expect to start moving into sort of the pre-construction, so that's when we advertise the project and then award the contracts, and then construction should start approximately fall of this year for all 3 components. But we are going through a process now with City Council where there is an appeal from the owner of the car dealerships, as well as a motion from Councilman Price's office. That's the council office that represents most of the project area. And so we are, my department and the City Planning Department are working on reports back to that committee of City Council to address those concerns in the reports.
And what are the concerns from the folks that are appealing the project?
Well, the appeal initially was written in a way where the concerns seem to be associated with economic impacts. However, at the last hearing that was held at City Council, the appellant basically voiced different concerns about the lack of consideration of alternative routes. So in our efforts to address those, our report is going to get into some detail in terms of addressing what the challenges would be, to considering alternate routes and sort of what's feasible, or what a little history and why Figueroa, and kind of get into more detail there. The motion is a little different. It's somewhat related, but really talking more about asking for again, City Planning and Department of Transportation to do a little more a thorough investigation into traffic, and really focusing on traffic impacts. And considering related projects, things we did look at in the IR, but there's a request for us to kind of get into a little bit more detail. So we're attempting to address that as well in a separate report.
And what are those traffic impacts expected to be?
Well, our EIR did we did issue a final EIR, and it did go through basically the primary impacts are traffic related, and we use a very conservative methodology that's part of our locally adopted threshold. So this is all part of the California Environmental Quality Act's requirements. And so we perform simulations essentially, and we compare the existing conditions, existing delays at all the major intersections, and we compare that to what we would anticipate with the project configuration. And we disclose essentially the changes in traffic delay based on that. But we really assume a very conservative scenario where We don't assume any real changes in travel behavior or mode or change in mode. We really want to keep it conservative because in the spirit of an environmental document and disclosing impacts, we want to be sure that we have the most robust document that's covering any foreseeable impacts, whether those actually are realized or not. And so there is, the numbers do show increased vehicular delay, and I think some increased vehicular delay is simply unavoidable. But again, our numbers are very conservative, so I think sometimes folks are scared off by the numbers. But what we've seen in other cities, if we look at studies throughout the nation, they've shown that similar projects, when lanes are reduced, do not result in the amounts of delay that are predicted. So I think it's important to go into it with that in mind.
Well, and just to clarify, that's delay for drivers only, right? And so, but we
Yes.
have on that street, you have the Silver Line as a rapid bus. One block over, you have the Expo Line. You have any number of other transit routes that run on that street. Are those going to be helped or hurt by this project?
Right, generally helped. The Expo Line will really not be impacted at all. It's on Flower Street, although there are one of the items in the motion that they're asking us to look at a couplet option where we would essentially redesign the project and implement a southbound cycle track on Flower, northbound cycle track on Fig. But in doing so, we could potentially impact Expo Line operations. So as the project stands right now, no changes, no impacts to the train. The Silver Line, we would maintain the northbound bus lane, which currently exists north of right around Adams Boulevard. So we really wouldn't impact the northbound peak period flow of the bus. There might be some southbound impacts to local bus travel, but Metro has already moved their southbound Silver Line service onto Flower Street. So I would say, generally speaking, very minimal negative impacts to transit. And in fact, I mean, the whole transit experience will be improved by way of improving the waiting areas significantly.
That's great. I think that's one of the key things for us is looking at this as a complete streets project, is it really does benefit everybody except for the travel time if you are choosing to drive into the center of the second largest city in the country, which is going to be understandably, there will be traffic delays associated with that. So we definitely see that there are trade-offs, but we're looking forward to making sure that, everybody is considered, and right now the street does not serve everybody who needs it to use it. Do you have any of safety data for what the current conditions are on Figueroa and how this project would impact that?
I can speak really anecdotally. I don't have with me here the numbers, but it's, again, a situation where these similar projects are proven to reduce collision rates. It's very simple. You have lower speeds. You have fewer conflicts between the various uses, especially between bicyclists and automobile drivers. So you're gonna likely see a reduction in car on bike, car versus bike, and also car versus car, and probably also car versus pedestrian, really, because of the speed reduction. Deborah can speak to this, I'm sure, in terms of data of what happens when a pedestrian is hit at a high speed. When you reduce that speed, you have the greatest chance of saving lives and saving injuries.
Yeah, the basic rule of thumb is if at 45 miles an hour you have an 85% chance of dying, at 25 miles an hour you have an 85% chance of living. So do the math. We do
this
have
project
some
will
data.
also, it'll shorten the crossing distance as well, right?
Not really, because even with the bus platforms on 11th Street, yes. But on Figueroa, we're really keeping the curbs where they are today, with the exception of those bus platforms. And those generally don't really lead in directly to the crosswalk, with maybe a couple exceptions. So that may not actually be, part of the Figueroa suite of benefits, but definitely on 11th Street, you're going to see a huge difference in the pedestrian experience there in terms of those crossings.
Well, one thing that the pedestrians will have great benefit is that cyclists who are now riding on the sidewalk because they don't feel comfortable riding in the bike lane that's currently on Figueroa Street are creating hazards, ped bike hazards on the sidewalks because many of the riders don't feel comfortable in the bike lanes on the street, on the roadway. So it'll be a definite improvement in that case because we saw lots of workers who go to LA Live and Staples Center as well as a lot of students at USC riding on the sidewalks.
That's a really great point. And this also, you mentioned that there will be bike lanes on 11th Street and potentially Martin Luther King at the end of this, kind of as part of, but separate from this project. There's also other planned bike lanes that will connect to this project, right?
Yes. Well, on Venice Boulevard, we're planning a combination of bus lanes and bike lanes. So immediately west of Figueroa, we are planning to implement bus lanes, which bicyclists can, of course, use. And then we are planning to east of Figueroa to do bike lanes on Venice, and that's part of the Venice corridor, which has primarily bike lanes all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So there's a huge connection there. I'm trying to think if there's any others. I think just really connecting into the downtown bike lane network. It's on 7th Street and the existing bike lane north on Figueroa, north of 7th, north of Wilshire. It's very close. Tying into that network is huge. So once they get into downtown, folks can then continue to ride their bike to other destinations in the downtown area and beyond.
Right, and also we have the brand new bike lanes on 7th Street through the heart of downtown as well. So this will connect right into those, right?
Absolutely.
So what have we missed in terms of describing the project's features? This really is, a complete street. It's something that LA has not really seen. This is also a picture of this project was behind Mayor Garcetti when he introduced his Great Streets initiative last October. Do we think that this is basically a prototype for what he's considering, or do we have any information about that?
I think so. I think it does exemplify in many ways what the idea of a great street can become. And there are a number of other treatments which the bike lanes, the protected bike lanes, get the most attention, but really there are a number of other improvements. Millions of dollars are being spent on lighting improvements alone. So that's to not only replace the vehicular lights and modernize those, but also to add pedestrian scale lighting in numerous locations. That's part of the overall goal to really improve the experience for those, for all users really, but particularly for pedestrians. And there's going to be landscaping. There will be some signage, dedicated wayfinding signage, new bus shelters in those platforms. So quite a few other improvements, not just for bikes.
And do we have any idea of where else projects like these are planned in the city right now?
This is really the only one of its kind at this moment, but there's a lot of discussion in terms of where else this type of project would be best suited, and then the next step, of course, is finding funding. This is such a unique situation in that, as you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the conversation, we've been very aggressive in terms of implementing bicycle lanes throughout the city, and those are generally pretty low capital cost. They don't cost a whole lot. And the reason this is the first one is not necessarily because we haven't wanted to start implementing these projects sooner. It's that they cost a lot of money, and this is an opportunity where we have the grant funding to do this type of project. So I hope that it's the first of many to come.
Right. In this case, we have, with the design and engineering costs for the 4 miles of streets, the 3 miles of Figueroa, half mile of 11th, and half mile of Martin Luther King, we have about $20 million. That, in my knowledge, is, what are we talking, $5 million a mile? That's probably, 4 or 5 times what any other project has ever had in the city of Los Angeles. So we not only have a great opportunity, but we have a serious amount of money to make some real change that can be a demonstration for what the rest of Los Angeles could have as important resources in each of their communities.
Well, and the Department of City Planning last week released their mobility element, which is part of the general plan and will replace an outdated document from the mid-'90s. It actually includes a bicycle enhanced network, which they are considering to be basically a citywide network of protected bikeways, whether those are on-street cycle tracks like Figueroa or whether those are very high-quality, traffic-calmed, bicycle-friendly streets through some of the neighborhoods. But it's looking like there's a 180-mile network of projects just like Myfig proposed across the city. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is it actually sets a target of implementing 45 miles of protected bikeways every 5 years. So that once we get going on this, that would be doing 3 MyFigueroa projects every year, which I'm sure is making Tim squirm because he realizes how much work that's going to involve, but hopefully we'll give him the resources he needs.
Yeah, I think the vision is an excellent one. It's a question of certainly allocating the appropriate resources and finding the appropriate funding, but I think having the right vision is the first step, and so I think the mobility element does lay the foundation for reaching that goal.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what the challenges are in terms of making these projects a little bit more normal or default? Is it basically just getting comfortable with the changes of design? Is it that LADOT needs to kind of update its normal way of doing business such that these projects are not special anymore? What's kind of going on that we should be aware of?
I don't think that's actually it at all. I think we're at the point now where we've gone well beyond the old department, where I think we have some great innovative engineers in our different various sections of my department that I've had the privilege of working with, who see where the direction we're going and are embracing it, and not only embracing it, but are applying really innovative design approaches. And it makes me it reassures me that I'm not really standing alone with these types of projects. That I have a whole team of really talented individuals. And I think MyFigueroa will prove that, in that we're really looking at a very innovative design in order to really, make it the best facility it can be. It's really a question of resources. It's a question of on the elected side of coming up with, budgeting the appropriate resources, and also, finding the funding. It's beyond even just the city of Los Angeles. It goes to, the metro level, the county level, the state level, even all the way to the federal level. It's allocating more funding for these types of projects, because we're currently, as you know, Eric, a tiny percentage of money, at those levels is allocated for active transportation. We need a lot more to be able to do more of these projects.
Right. The numbers that we use when working on countywide policy is that biking and walking combined are 19% of all trips in Los Angeles County. They make up 39% of roadway fatalities, people getting killed on our streets every year. But we currently only spend 1% of our transportation dollars on walking and biking. So we need to definitely step up that commitment and see whether that's the next sales tax at a countywide level, whether that's looking at money that's already coming in from our local return on our current sales tax. I noticed that the mobility element does call for us to spend 20% of measure our local return on walking and biking instead of just 10% that's currently spent today. So I'm excited that the policy landscape seems to be shifting in favor of investing in these types of projects. Absolutely.
I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah, and I might just add on, I'm working on a project to look at pedestrian and bike linkages around Union Station, and we are absolutely considering network of protected cycle tracks in a planning effort that we're doing for Metro to connect to Union Station and to the regional connector station at First and Central. The only funding that's available is some funding related to the regional connector, where they'll have about $4 million to implement some of the ideas that we come out in this plan. But that might be the sort of next phase of when we can look for some potential other protected cycle tracks in Los Angeles.
Hey, Eric, I have a question for you, actually. I'm curious to know your thoughts. I was reading a blog recently. There was a guest writer who discussed a different theory about cycling, and it was really, I guess they're known as the vehicular cyclists. There's this whole notion of rather than implement dedicated infrastructure and dedicated space for bicyclists, that there should be more of a focus on encouraging folks to share lanes with cars, and that infrastructure actually does more harm. I don't personally agree with that, but I'm curious because I feel like there's a lot of folks or some folks at least out there that share that sentiment. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, and I saw the same post on bikinginla.com, and there are some diverging viewpoints out there about the use of infrastructure. I think what we've seen and our position as a bicycle coalition is that the evidence is pretty clear that when you build bike lanes, people ride bikes, more people ride bikes. And so if you have a goal of promoting ridership, then it's very clear that infrastructure has to be part of the solution. I think that doesn't replace the role of education. I think that everybody agrees that we need more education, and whether that's in elementary, middle, and high school, or whether that is as part of your driver's test, increasing the level of awareness on the part of motorists. It absolutely, education is a piece of it, but if you don't provide a place that's safe and comfortable for people to do the right thing, then they don't tend to do it. And I think what we've found in our own bike counts, because LACBC is the one that organizes the citywide bike counts in Los Angeles every 2 years, is that when you add bike lanes, you tend to double bike ridership on any given street, you reduce sidewalk riding, and you reduce wrong-way riding. And so those are the things that tend to be really dangerous, and all of them are mitigated when you provide a safe and comfortable facility for people to ride in. And I cannot wait to do bike counts after the My Figueroa project goes in, because I think it's just going to show exactly the same thing, that when you provide a safe and comfortable facility, people will tend to use it, and they're going to tend to use it properly.
So on that effort, I know LA Walks helped support LACBC's effort to do the bike count. Did we do any intersections along Figueroa in the bike count in October?
We did. We did Figueroa and Venice, and Figueroa and 7th, and I believe maybe even Figueroa and Martin Luther King. So we definitely counted very heavily along this corridor in order to be able to show the before and after counts.
Right. That's great. Well, I might add that when we first started the project with the consultant team, we had people meet at 7th and Figueroa, and some people walked, some people rode bikes, some people took the bus, some people drove down Figueroa, some people drove on the freeway. There might have been one other route. Of course, the cyclists, so this was to get all the way down to Martin Luther King. The cyclists got there first. The second was the driver along Figueroa. The freeway was slower. It took us about an hour. I was part of the walking team. So it was an interesting experience to see the comparison. And so we all know that mobility can greatly be improved by adding to the bike network, and people will actually be able to get there better than they could in their car. And that didn't even include trying to park the car and find a place.
Well, and that's the thing, is it usually is faster to bike than people realize. In the county, about half of all trips are less than 3 miles, and that's 3 miles is right about that distance where it's kind of about the same time to drive and bike. Less than 3 miles, which is again half of all trips, are probably faster to bike than to drive if the right facilities are provided. So there's definitely a lot of untapped potential out there if we can make the investments that we need to make. I don't know, Tim, what are your thoughts? Because you actually are, when people criticize bike lane design, they oftentimes are looking at badly designed bike lanes as opposed to well-designed bike lanes. Do you want to talk about some of the features that you try to include to make them better and not have some of the conflicts that the vehicular cyclists point to?
Sure. I mean, I think personally that any bike lane, almost any bike lane, is an improvement over existing condition, with a few exceptions. And at least in the case of any project that we implement, we feel that it's definitely better than the status quo. But certainly there is you have the whole spectrum of what the benefits can be, and as you make the facility more robust. I think with Myfig, we are not just doing any old protected bike lane. We're actually trying to make the best protected bike lane in the nation, and we've looked at what other cities have done. And what we're trying to do is really protect the bicyclists as much as possible from other movements. And the key thing is, how do you deal with the intersections? Because what some other cities have done is they've created these protected bike lanes, but then just shy of the intersection, it becomes a traditional bike lane, and they then have to merge with vehicular traffic. And we're not doing that on Figueroa, and that to me would really defeat the purpose. So we're providing dedicated bicycle signals, which will give positive indications. In other words, the bicyclist will receive a green light for bikes. At the same time, the through vehicles on Figueroa will receive green lights. But the turning movements, the right turns, will be given red arrows. So they will not be permitted to turn in front of the bicyclist. And that's really your number one source of conflict. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there will be no buses pulling in front of or blocking the bicycle lanes throughout the cycle track portions. So those are really the key elements of how you make that facility safe and how you also improve the perception of safety. It's not just raw safety numbers, it's actually making people feel safe. Because I'm sure, Eric, you can attest to this, I think a lot of people don't ride not because it's actually unsafe, but because they feel unsafe. So if we can make them feel safer and also improve the actual safety, that's two birds with one stone right there, I think.
Absolutely. What are some of the downsides of signalizing intersections specifically for bicyclists?
Well, I think, as I think I touched on a little bit earlier, the aggressive cyclists who want to just barrel through may be a little frustrated when they have to stop while, other movements are occurring that wouldn't otherwise be conflicting movements. So it's not going to be the highest performance facility in terms of getting from point A to point B as fast as possible. It's really tough to do both on a street. The only way to do that, to be high performance and protect it, is to do bike paths, which are typically completely off the roadbed. I mean, you're talking like the LA River. In an urban environment, it's impossible to really achieve those two goals unless you build like elevated veloways or something of extremely high capital costs. So I think we're balancing it to the best that we can in this particular environment. It's going to have a minimal increased delay in terms of a similar configuration with the same number of lanes with non-protected movements. So you're only going to have maybe some extra delays for those right turners. But we've come up with a very innovative way to handle the right turns and in a way that will relieve some of that, I think, to some extent. So it's a balancing act. It definitely is a balancing act, but I think we're doing a pretty good job with it.
Well, and it sounds like, the same trade-offs in some ways for the bicyclist, which is essentially a trade-off between delay and safety. And so, we're having that same trade-off at a macro level with the motorist, and even on the design details for the cyclist, you have the same thing. And what's exciting is in the framework that we're moving toward in the city of Los Angeles is that safety is first. And so we are trying to remove conflicts. And even if that takes, 10 seconds at an intersection, then we're basically saying, as a matter of policy, that that's okay.
Right, I agree. I think safety is, of course, it's always been number one for us, but now that it's being addressed more aggressively than ever before in a different way. So I think, I think it will be, in the end, it's the right way to go. I think cyclists, obviously, it's tougher out there for them. They're having to deal with cons. They have to be more alert. They're having to deal with potential conflicts all the time. Obviously, human power, burn more energy, and they're not going as fast. It is typically a little bit slower when you get to the longer distances. So we want to do our best to try to encourage, to keep the flow, to encourage that to the extent we can, but we do have to focus on the safety aspect and really make sure that we reduce the conflicts.
Well, I think what is not apparent in the conversation, but that is part of the benefit as well, since there's a right turn arrow, that will also be a benefit for pedestrians, so that they can step off the curb without feeling like somebody's going to make a right turn in front of them, because they will have the through signal along with the cyclists. Right.
What we're actually looking at doing is something quite innovative. It's a bit of a compromise with that, but we are going to have a situation where initially there will be a red arrow for the right turns, the through movements for the bikes and the adjacent vehicles. And once the bicyclists clear the intersection, that indication will turn to red. But the motorist will not receive a green arrow. It will receive a yellow flashing arrow, which is permissive. Essentially, it's telling them that they can proceed if they yield. And what they'll do at that point is yield to pedestrians that remain in the crosswalk. And then they'll be able to proceed. But it will be a form of leading pedestrian interval in the sense that, as Boris mentioned, the pedestrians can step off the curb initially without any other conflicting movements. And that helped us sort of balance the needs of being able to clear those right turners and also get the through movements and keep the safe operation.
That's exciting. Are there plans to use leading pedestrian intervals anywhere else in the city?
I can't speak to that directly. My particular section doesn't handle that, but it's something that can always be considered. So it's a tool. It's in the toolbox.
Right. It's something that Los Angeles Walks wants to promote and work on. So we'll move on to that after a lot of our other challenges that we're underway with at the moment.
And what are some of those other challenges? You want to talk a little bit about what LA Walks is up to? I know you guys are busy, and us bicyclists don't always pay attention to all the great things that you're doing. So share what your priorities are.
one thing that we're working on together is the street bond. We want to make sure that the city's proposed street bond, and remember streets include roads and sidewalks, that the sidewalks are included in that bond measure, so that we're addressing all users of our streets and not just making sure that the pavement on our roads is in better condition. And that we do that investment in a smart way, that we set priorities for places where more people are moving, whether on foot or on a bike or in a bus or in a car, so that heavy transit areas or active commercial districts are some of the first places that we do the investments with that bond, so that would help set some of the priorities for where the money gets spent. We're working on trying to look at hit and run issues and appropriate punishment for people of taking their driver's license away. We're working with the state Cal Walks on looking to what other cities have been doing in terms of establishing a Vision Zero, in terms of reducing crashes and deaths to nothing, to deaths to zero. So that's something we're going to get underway with. There's other things. I got to think of them all. What else am I doing, Eric?
Many things. But I think the street bond is something when we mentioned earlier in terms of trying to make these types of complete streets more routine. I think so. For those that don't know, there's a proposal by two council members on the LA City Council to do a multi-billion-dollar investment in repaving our streets, and this really started as a pothole fixing type program where it really was focused on curb-to-curb, smooth pavement and nothing else. And what working with Deborah and some folks from Climate Resolve and Heal the Bay and Tree People and community health councils and a whole host of other environmental and community-based nonprofits, we've kind of come together and decided that our streets should be complete. They should be green. We should be capturing our stormwater. We should increasing this tree cover, and they should be cool, which is actually here in Los Angeles where we have somewhat 330 plus days of sunshine. We want to make sure that we're reflecting as much of that heat rather than holding on to it, so that way we can reduce our air conditioning bills as well. And so in trying to build streets that are for the future, we can, rebuild our streets in a way that really advances multiple objectives instead of just basically paving potholes, which I don't think is very inspiring for anybody, and it particularly doesn't meet the needs of the future. So we've been really happy to work with you and other partners on that exciting thing.
Yeah, what we call streets of the future, right? Streets for the future or of the future?
I think it depends who's talking.
That's right. Well, and I think the other part of the cool streets is that streets become cool, right? That we want to be out on our public rights of way, that we're out there enjoying each other, that we're adding to the culture and the activity of our neighborhoods. So it can be, I don't want to call it hip or trendy, but that people want to be out meeting each other on our streets.
Right, and we just see this huge energy in Los Angeles for the types of projects like Myfig as a kind of prototype for these types of things, but then in scaling up these ideas so that when we do make large investments into our streets, into our transit system, into our highways, that they do take into account the needs of everybody and what's truly possible. I think Los Angeles has really been a great source of ideas on so many levels and a huge source of innovation, but we always struggle with dealing with our scale as a county. We are 10 million people in the county, 4 million people in the city of Los Angeles, like 6,800 centerline miles of streets. So anytime we do anything here in Los Angeles, it has to be big in order to make a difference. And so thanks to visionaries like Deborah and the pragmatic people like Tim, I think we're going to get there eventually, and hopefully we'll see some significant improvements in our lifetime. So any last thoughts from either of you?
I would just say that even though we've talked a lot about mobility, it's also about placemaking and enhancing neighborhoods and making a healthy, sustainable city. So we always have to make sure that it's not just about moving people, but it's also about people wanting them to stay in place as well as move between places.
Yeah, I would just say, and it's been touched on in the conversation, but safety is the absolute number one goal in my job and in our department and, really the city of Los Angeles. That's a huge focus of what we do. And so, a lot of folks, I think, end up having the discussions that are had are often focusing on bicyclists and specific types of usage versus really what I think the primary goal is always to make our streets safer for everybody, not just one particular type of user, but for all users. So I think this is a project that will exemplify that very well.
Great, and I want to thank you both for taking the time to speak about this. For those listeners that are interested in finding out more information about this project or just general what's happening in Los Angeles, please go to our website, www.la-bike.org, and you'll find out about our campaigns to bring these protected bikeways across the city, as well as specific projects like Myfig Wonkystyle, Hollywood Boulevard, and any number of other signature things that are going on here in Los Angeles. And Deborah, what's your website for Los Angeles Walks?
It's losangeleswalks.org. We do a lot of activities and events and take people on walks. We're doing a big walking day of action on March 4th at Union Station to go out there as superheroes to protect pedestrians as they cross the street. I might as well mention as well that there's a myfigueroa.com website that has information about the project if you want to see images or get a little more background on the project. There's also a Facebook page, Myfigueroa, and as well that's the Twitter handle. So people who want to follow what's going on. We haven't had a lot of updates recently, but as soon as we do, you'll be noticed on all that stuff.
And we also have a website for our department, our section, I should say. It's bicyclela.org, and you'll find all the information I think you'll need regarding all the projects we're working on and bicycle maps, all kinds of great resources there.
Great, and we're expecting this project to come back to City Council's Planning and Land Use Committee kind of in a couple of weeks, correct? Hopefully we're still on track, right?
Yeah, mid to late March. Date has not been set, but it will be soon.
Excellent. So stay tuned to all of those wonderful websites that you just heard, and you will find out when this is coming back, because we do need supporters of this project to come out and be heard. So thank you both very much, and that's it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bike Talk. If you want to hear more, go to kpfk.org, navigate to Programs, and choose Bike Talk. On the Bike Talk page, click on the Archives link to play or download shows posted in the last 4 months. Go to biketalk.com and copy or click on the RSS feed link to subscribe. Our Twitter handle is BikeTalkPFK. On Facebook, we are Bike Talk. You can become friends and join our group.